You got a choice. You either jump out of the plane or you don't. And that kind of goes across with education, the system where students are often forced into a choice, right? Like college ready or career ready. We go academic, technical, white collar, blue collar, all these different things. But what if that entire structure is outdated?
And there really is no functional benefit to do what's right by kids under a funding system where your success isn't really about being successful. Your success is around creating the optics of success.
Showing people like that we quote unquote threw out an old idea that we shouldn't have is disruptive in education.
I did this interview and he was like, "Is this what you're really going to do?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "This is really disruptive." And I go, "I guess this is appropriate. I want to disrupt education." And I go, he goes, if you blow the district up, we're going to have to fire you.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education podcast, powered by U Science. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrasser and Ali Dahl.
Welcome to this episode of the Disrupt Education podcast. I am Peter Hostrasser, and Ali Dahl is with me. We have a guest coming up, but Ali, I think we're both wearing the same shirt. I know, like
we are wearing the same shirt.
This is weird. We've never done this before, by the way.
we both have the shirts, but we haven't both worn the shirts for the podcast, the little things. Yeah, because we have merch now that you can have. Yeah. It's new, which is fun.
Love it. What's going on with you, Ali?
It's late spring. This will come out in the summertime, and if you know me, that's skydiving season, and I got to do some really cool tandems this past weekend. It was like their 30-year bucket list, and I like to hold space for people who have had a dream or something they've really wanted to do and then finally do it, because that's like so many people just hold like an item for so long and then they never follow through. Yes. And it's just like this thing they never experienced. So getting to share something like that with someone is incredibly special. And I think about that in education, like how many kids have had a dream since they were 5, and like we're holding space for that and trying to like make that happen in the education field. Like we have to kind of think about kids' dreams and hopes and stuff like that and take them seriously. So I think that's a really good way to start the podcast.
Yeah, you got a choice. You either jump out of the plane or you don't. And that kind of goes across with education, the system where students are often forced into a choice, right? Like college ready or career ready. We go academic, technical, white collar, blue collar, all these different things. But what if that entire structure is outdated? What if the problem isn't the students? What if the system design is the challenge? And that's where we have today's guest. Chris NeSmith is here with us. He spent several years rethinking that question, from youth apprenticeship and mastery-based learning to statewide workforce systems and competency-based education. And at the center of his work is one powerful idea: students shouldn't have to choose between opportunity and practicality. Did I hit it, Chris? How you doing?
You nailed it. But I just want to point out, this isn't a new idea. Like, it's not a new idea at all. So
got it. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are you up to these days?
Well, I'm Chris NeSmith. I'm the superintendent of the Elma School District, but I also like to point out I was a student of work-based learning. I used to work at a Saint-Gobain sapphire manufacturing plant, and I worked in inventory, production, and control. So my job was to do data input in the late 90s and early 2000s on sapphire production, sapphire wafers. So like, you might not know this, but like a sapphire is 9 on Mohs hardness scale, but it also has the same semi-conducting ability as silicon. So you can build like really high-powered computer wafers that are also near indestructible, or much stronger. And but also I'm a student who I couldn't go straight to university. I had to go back. I mean, I didn't get my last high school German credit because I was over on this job site doing inventory production and control, looking at lost sapphire production. But as a school district leader, it's funny, we talked about podcasts, I've done actually piles of podcasts and webinars and training on data and student achievement data and tracking student growth and how we've actually like looked at lost, how are we tracking where our students are growing and managing student growth. So it's so funny, like the data tools I learned as a work-based learning student have been so valuable as a superintendent, but they weren't valuable enough to get me in the door of a post-secondary education.
That's crazy. I will say we are lucky to have a superintendent on the podcast because I feel like you're busy, you got a lot going on. But what I love about getting to know you and whatnot through other avenues that are soon to be announced is that you have a really strong voice in education. Like you want to move things forward. I'm just curious, like, does that come from, like you just mentioned, your work-based learning experiences, or is there like other parts of that story that kind of have shaped where you're at today and like wanting to kind of be a public figure? I mean, like, and doing more than just what you do as a superintendent. Like you're very involved.
I don't know if I'd say I want to be a public figure. I think I've just faced a lot of failure. I always say this. I'm probably like the biggest failure in the room anybody will ever meet. I remember like getting really, I went to college and got my degree in business education, was high school business education teacher. And I remember wanting to be a CT director. Like we needed to break apart this kind of bifurcation of our students. Like we're placing our students into these different kind of pathways, and we're saying that's what you're going to be. And I mean, really just getting obsessed with it. So, like, I remember building pathways for our school as a CT department chair. And I always say this, I interviewed 28 times in Washington State to be a CT director, assistant principal. I had three on the idea that we're going to build pathways. And I had three school districts reopen, like three places I interviewed reopen the job. Like their answer is we'd rather have nobody than somebody who wants to do this work. And the feedback was always the same. Like this is very like, early 2010 to 2013, no one was really talking about pathways. I mean, Pathways to Prosperity came out in 2011 on how we need to rethink and like make it, but no one was talking about actually doing it. And I remember talking to my wife going, should I like just do the regular CT director interview? Like, we're just going to keep your Perkins maintained. We're going to have a fun welding sculpture class. We're going to make fire pits. Like, should we go into these interviews and have those conversations? And my wife said, well, is that what you're going to do? And I go, well, no. She's like, I'm going to build these pathways. And she goes, well, you probably should just tell them exactly what you're going to do because you don't want to tell them you're going to do something else, get hired, and then really have them freak out when you do it. So my very, very good friend, Peter Finch, was the assistant superintendent in West Valley, Yakima. And I did this interview and he was like, is this what you're really going to do? And I go, yeah. He goes, this is really disruptive. And I go, I guess this is appropriate. I want to disrupt education. And I go, he goes, if you blow the district up, we're going to have to fire you. And that was actually how they did my board approval meeting too. They said, well, this is what he's going to do. And the board's like, are we sure we can do this? And he goes, just a reminder, directors have no protections in Washington State. So if he does blow everything up, we can just fire him. So the idea is you can do it, but if you screw it up, we're going to fire you. And I was like, that's a fair trade. I'll take that deal. And we're going to go ahead and build career pathways. And then I think from there, it was just better to be lucky than good.
I've been in that position, not quite at that level, and I did go through a whole, hey, I'm going to disrupt education. I played the brand, and they were like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then when I did it, they were like, hold up. So I feel for you there. That's very interesting. So okay, let's go into these pathways, right? Technical pathways sometimes close doors instead of opening them. What changes have you done to kind of pathways? And I'm saying that as a quote that some people will say, by the way. It's college or career. Is that a false binary? Like what did you do from that day on when you got the chance to build the pathways?
It was really hired to build a manufacturing program.
Hmm.
And we were looking at Washington allows what's called a credit equivalency. So you can actually say this manufacturing is going to be worth an English credit or a math credit or computer science would be worth algebra 2. But really what did it for me is like in 2016 and took this first trip to Germany and we're at Bauhaus University and they're like, we produce the best engineers in the world. And you're like, tell me more. And they go, Let's compare a 22-year-old German student versus a 22-year-old American. A German student is going to do a 3-year carpentry apprenticeship, and then they're going to prepare for the Abitur, take the Abitur, show they have academic readiness. And then they're going to move into a 4-year applied structural engineering degree. So a 22-year-old German student is going to have 7 years of experience, 3 actually building houses.
Hmm.
Now, compare that to an American student who's going to do 15 years of kind of generic liberal arts education and 2 years of engineering theory. And then the same 22-year-old will have never built a house. So, and it wasn't so much the fact that I think I just kind of want to shift the mindset a bit because we keep on talking about we should break down the barriers.
Mhm.
I don't think that goes far enough. Because if we're really talking about having the best skilled workforce, shouldn't our engineers be able to build the things they've designed? So, are we having the right conversation when we're saying a kid in a CTE pathway should be able to have access to post-secondary education, or should we value the experience the CTE pathway brings into the ability of having done the work that they're now designing?
Hmm.
So, and that really moved my thinking that I don't know if we're even going far enough.
I mean, when you look at it that like you talk about this on it's a pretty recent post, the carpenter to engineer pathway. You're kind of hitting on that. So I'm guessing that came out of this trip to Germany. Uh, but I didn't know that the German students have basically 7 years of real experience under their belts. That's that's wild. I'm curious, like with the carpenter to engineer, how you moved that trip to Germany and everything to kind of like this idea with we have dead ends, or we say like, oh, you can be a carpenter, but if you're a carpenter then you can't be an engineer. Like, there's this fallacy that it or rather it's a structural limitation in our system where like you go down a pathway and it's hard to pivot or it's a huge investment to pivot. I'm curious on your thoughts
So
some of that.
I'm a very, very proud Washington State University doctoral holder. I did my doctorate degree through Washington State University, and that holds some real value. Washington WSU is a land grant school, a moral act land grant university. And what's important to remember about these is the moral land grant universities were in the design of Booker T. Washington all the way back to like Tuskegee University, kind of moving into a South re-engagement and the post-slavery economy on how are we going to take like agricultural careers and embed with high technical skills in a Tuskegee University to start really building this advanced skilled workforce. And most Moral Act land grant universities were designed on this. You're moving into like agricultural communities or rural communities or economic re-envision where you're marrying working on a farm with engineering skills. So this idea is actually original in the United States. So when they were designing the Swiss and German apprenticeship, they really came to the United States to look at these moral land grant universities. But then we made a really, really intentional decision on the kind of upper 10%. So we were going to change our education where the top 10% were going to be university bound and the bottom 90% were going to be workers. And we actually moved forward by this design in the United States with intention. So, I mean, so we have all of these universities designed around this idea of tearing down that barrier. But we always got to remember the barriers that are existing now have intentionally been there for 100 years. So when we're trying to tear it apart, and then it got really reaffirmed when you're moving through like desegregation in the 1960s and you're kind of bringing black schools and white schools together, there's an intentionality of still maintaining segregation inside the school. So this separation that actually never had to exist, I think we're not going to be able to tear it apart unless we look at the genesis of how career and tech ed was designed and acknowledge that it was designed intentionally to be a bifurcation, to be a false binary. So we're not really tearing apart something that was accidentally there. We're tearing apart something that's very intentionally has been there. And the model that the Swiss and Germans have been following was actually originally designed in the United States, and we made an intentional decision to not do it. So, so I think kind of going back to that grounding premise. So when we built our youth apprenticeship program, I think it's easy to really think about this as a parent. Would I allow my student to do our youth apprenticeship? So when we launched a full journey level registered apprenticeship, our students did a 2,000-hour registered apprenticeship, 2,000 hours of OJT on the job through the Department of Labor. They walked away with their journey card. They did 15 hours of RSI, which is the West Coast is related supplemental instruction. So East Coast listeners are probably thinking RTI, related training instruction, which is the coursework aligned to a full registered apprenticeship. We had to do a three-way partnership between the JATC, the Joint Apprenticeship Training Committee, community college, well, four-way partnership, community college to award 15 college credits. The high school had to take full lead on academic credit. So Washington State allows for credit equivalency. So we had to make sure it was worth math, science, and English credit. So Algebra 2 credit, applied physics, and ELA, 12th grade ELA, through technical reading and technical writing as they're doing the blueprint. Walk through the actual academic standards and show what standards are being done. And we had to do a crosswalk, and through the employers to ensure that they had the students on an official skill rotation. So then that meant that our teachers were really looking at those academic skills. And really the model came out, it wasn't that radical. When I was in Germany, they had this auto shop teacher. He goes, I teach auto shop, but I also teach social study or civics. And I'm like, tell me more.
Yeah.
He goes, the auto shop is the best place to learn civics. And I'm like, no, sir, I need you to tell me more. And he goes, how do you teach civics? Gun control, birth control, all of the top level issues that your 17 and 18-year-olds have no experience with. Well, all the things that we would hope your 17 and 18-year-olds are not really having firsthand experience with. But he goes, we teach by disposing of oil. And we have to go through the municipal codes and the regional codes, and we have to go up. He goes, versus in the United States, you're starting high and you're going down. In the Swiss and German system, we're moving up. And you realized how much opportunity was lost. And the role of the school system wasn't really just doing all the occupational skills, but really focusing on the integrity of the academic skills. Now, their assessment was much easier. You have to pass the arbiter, you take a test. Our system, though, allows for competency and mastery-based crediting. So we needed to do a very sincere and earnest intention on academic competency and ensuring it was done, and then how we built out our system on academic competency and how it folds into those real world experiences.
We just want to pause right here and share a little bit more about YouScience.
Well, instead of us actually talking about it, Allie, why don't we just roll clips of guests speaking about it? Sound good?
That was awesome.
All right, let's roll these.
We really had to say that was where we brought in YouScience, intentional planning, so that no matter who they spoke with, whether it be their counselor, whether it be one of our CTE coordinators, whether it be one of our programs that were coming in to help, that they were the ones saying, hey, this is what I see myself. This is what I'm good at. These are my strengths. This is how you can help me. Our student outcomes started to change where we never guessed they would. Our failure rates went down.
So when I ran into YouScience and kind of started digging into the evidence-based research that both the interest and aptitude side of YouScience sits on, I thought, this is it. This is how we make college not a very expensive career exploration for students. This is how we get kids in the right field.
What about someone who's an engineer and they say, but I really don't want to go to college? Well, USAC can do that little subtle shift away from engineering and just say, well, what about mechatronics and PLC technicians? So it allows you to pinpoint where a student may feel comfortable, and you're not just guessing.
Well, there you have it, Allie. This is what people on our podcast say. We don't need to say it again and again.
Everybody who brings up YouScience, even the messages and the conversations we have outside of the podcast, they all go back to everything you just heard and more.
Exactly. Hit up uscience.com/disrupt education -podcast. Basically, you'll see how YouScience Brightpath uses data, aptitude, insights, and real-world connections to close the career exposure gap. Just request a demo there. Tell them you heard about them on Disrupt Education Podcast. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Reach out today. The most important word nobody uses is permeability. right? And
That's
you've
right.
said that. Use the word in a really powerful way. Is that what we're talking about here? Can you explain what a permeable education system looks like? Is it Germany? And why this matters for students in any lens? I mean, in
Well,
equity and yeah.
I think I want to kind of tear down like this misnomer. We all talk about the German and Swiss tracking system. They tell you who's going to be a career kid and who's going to be a university bound kid. And that's really, really true. The Swiss system did that, or the Swiss and German system did that through the 90s. And then they started finding this declining enrollment in their TVET apprenticeships, technical vocational education and training apprenticeships. And they had to go back and study. And it really came back to what we should all already know as parents. Would you put your child in one of these apprenticeships if it meant the doors were closed?
Mm, mhm.
And so as a result, and Gates Foundation has done a lot of research on this. We know in the United States that the best return, the best economic return on your education is a 4-year state university bachelor's degree. You go get a bachelor's degree, it'll give you guaranteed the best return on investment. So you as a parent have to make a conscious decision under a current CTE model. Do I want not permanently, but do I want to force my child to go back and restart over like I had to do by closing that door? So the idea of permeability is as you reach the conclusion of this education, have we kept your doors open? Are you permeable to all forms of education? Is it truly a pathway or is it just a highway that has no exit? So the Swiss call it permeability, and I've really hung on to that idea of permeability. But our permeability needed to look different than the Swiss system and the German system. They do it by testing. Ours needed to be, and when you begin looking at university admissions requirements, it's all credit based. So how can we rethink credit awarding and academic competency? And if it's going to be through competency and crediting, then we really need to look at an American mechanism.
This is a whole enlightenment episode.
I know,
Like,
right?
people
I'm
are
like
gonna have
taking
to
notes like crazy.
yeah, I'm gonna like there's a lot what you're saying is very like dense and there's a lot in there. That's great. It's gonna force people to have to listen to it multiple times.
I've
So
heard that before. I've heard many, many times before. My writing or recorded conversations are better than when I'm in meetings because they say we capture about 10% of it and then we have to go back. So
I have a feeling I know now why German engineered cars had kind of gone down in quality though post 90s. Just FYI, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. There's no data behind that, but what you
um so you're clearly deeply entrenched in this work, which is why whether you don't want to be a public figure, you know, maybe don't like that term, you are one.
Here you
Um
are.
but you know what, another, I would say one of the more disruptive ideas that you kind of bring up, and I don't know that it should be, but it gets people talking, is that we should be having career conversations earlier, and you say middle school. And so like, why do you believe in the work that you've done that waiting until high school is too late for many students?
I don't know if I get to own all of this idea. We had to when I was when I was a CT director in Yakima, Washington. Our middle school was probably about 70% CTE, and in fact I moved my office to the middle school. So just by observation, you began seeing like students get a chance to explore and see these opportunities. So instead of running an 8th grade earth science class, we ran a clean energy and material science class. And instead of a life science, 7th grade life science class, we ran a 7th grade human body systems class. We still covered all the life science standards, but we connected it to medical-based careers to kind of give students this chance to explore. And what we saw is the student interest in moving into these advanced courses as we started building out those completer pathways began to diversify. So that's what we saw firsthand. And now there's a piles of work through Ed Strategy Group and Advanced CTE and on the power of middle school programming and looking at how middle school programming actually is the #1 distributor of equitable enrollment and closing equity-based achievement gaps. Because it takes students who maybe thought, like, if I did this career pathway, I was going to be pigeonholed, and moving on, putting them in a chance to explore before credits count. So the idea is it has the greatest impact of letting students kind of see what their potential is and identifying their pathway. So we know that. So, but the idea wasn't, we weren't building CT electives. It was how can we start redoing our application classes? And then one of the best things we did is it's a well-known curriculum. It's called AMPed. It's tied to the construction and geometry crew. We launched an AMPed program, a manufacturing class that was filled full of CNC machines. I've seen the model that does t-shirts, but we did a CNC machine program where we had like the mini shop bots. We might have to reach out to Shopbot and see if they'll sponsor you for this episode. Um, but we had students running full manufacturing classes for algebra credit in 7th and 8th grade. And it started responding to another issue we had. We started having like algebra attrition. So we were doing a big push on algebra skills in 7th and 8th grade, and our students were losing those algebra skills by the time they're hitting calculus in their junior and senior year of high school. So by running this AMPed class, our algebra retention skyrocketed. Well, normally you see construction and geometry, and AMPed was being used for remediation, like 10th and 11th grade algebra remediation. And we used it for our advancement, and it improved our algebra retention for calculus students. So we started just really thinking like now we have our most advanced students in the district are seeing what manufacturing is happening. Those are the students that are not signing up for apprenticeship programs and career pathways that now started to, because they started seeing the benefit of the applied nature. The kids who wanted to be engineers were moving into our mechanical engineer, or the students that want to be mechanical engineers are moving into our manufacturing registered apprenticeship. And we saw a distribution, a restructure of the equity of students enrolling in our programs. This is stuff we did a decade ago.
Right. Yeah. No, it's like we did. I hear a lot of our educators like talking that way. It's like, dude, we did this. Why, you know, but it's funny that we got away from it, but now we're kind of coming back to it because if I remember, I'm old enough where, we had a lot of like, I mean, I went to a very small school where we had diesel mechanics actually working on tractors and different things like that. And as those students went on, you see that path of improvement. But I think one thing that we might have missed is how do you take a look at that algebra or calculus class later, right? Then there's got to be some curriculum adjustment and maybe some educator adjustment, or that teacher teaches both, like you've come across. And in this, I we always call it groundbreaking work, but it's not like we've done this before. It's just kind of common sense came back. I don't want to, dilute it that much, but I do really because I'm a business educator like you coming through, and we see it with our internship students is it's too late in high school. When they come to us, we have juniors coming to us who have never been like they don't have a resume. They don't have like these things that they should have. But what happens when students go through this and learn the real work instead of just seat time, as you just said, is it starts to build this well, the scores are there and you see that retention is there. What do you see about students like really believing in themselves? Is there a clarity? Have you seen a difference after these experiences for a student, not just data, but like the person?
Well, I want to look at like, again, every example I'm giving you is a decade old example. My most recent work has really, like my doctoral work and everything has really dug into like, we looked at the structure of the Swiss system, and I realized it doesn't work in the United States because their system is so top-down government and the United States is so decentralized. So just bear with me. Most of my examples are going to be a decade old. So one of the things we looked at in that is really when you look at the Swiss research they had and what we see now and what you looked at through the high school work and the middle school work is it really just comes down to how you're labeling your students, which piles of research through special education tells you when your student knows that you think less of them, they're going to respond to how you think of them. So just like probably one of the most biggest examples we saw is like when I was a district director and administrator was we weren't going to have any dead ends. Washington State has, and many states are adopting financial algebra as an Algebra 2 graduation equivalent. But our students know why it exists. It exists to just get them graduated. So we could try to do the other thing, which is we're going to do less financial algebra. We're going to start getting more kids into pre-calc or trigonometry and that university-bound placement. And that's generally the solutions we come across. it's realistically everybody's kind of approaching the problem in the same way. We have this dichotomy that we're going to be a career pathway school and we're going to get kids graduated. We're going to be a university prep school and we're going to get kids. And anybody kind of moves between those two solutions on the culture of your community and where you're going to drive your students. And I just felt like we don't need to subscribe to that. So my old college roommate was the director of College of Business for Central Washington University, where we went to school at the time. And we said, we're going to turn this into dual credit Finance 174, which is a university quantitative math class. Why is the solution always going to be, are you in a career pathway or we're going to be in a university prep? And why have we forced ourselves into this false dichotomy? So let's just elevate financial algebra to a 5-credit quantitative university math credit. So we did, and it resulted in a 10% increase in our university going rate because our kids that just thought they weren't good enough for math and weren't not, I mean, I'm not a university kid. I'm in a career CTE class because I can't go to university. That's why I'm there. To go back and tell a room of 250 students were taking financial algebra, algebra to graduate, to now 250 kids were earning 5 university math credits. So I think when you open yourselves up to step away from that dichotomy and to say, why don't we just make this class 5-credit university math credit and just remove the own mental barrier? We saw an immediate quantitative increase, 10 more percent. So that's 40 more kids who went to university because we're at 400, we graduated about 400 per class. 40 more kids went to university immediately in the very next year.
That's a huge shift.
Ellie, I've said this to students. Yes, that's huge. I love that because one of the things that I have said to students before, where they tell me right away, I'm not good at math. It's so funny. And you're actually now legitimizing it and making it happen. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to give you $5. You give me $20 back. And they're like, no. And I'm like, why? I'm going to lose money. Well, like, how much? $15. You just did algebra. Sorry. Yes. Thank you. I'm like clapping huge here.
But it took us back to that original German mentality, right? Like it's not just a mentality because CT people, I remember when I was doing keynote conferences and you're like, I think my message was we have to stop because well-intentioned CT people keep on saying not every kid goes to college. And I understand what you're trying to say. We shouldn't be shoving every kid in a university-based pathway. We need to have job-ready skills, but you're still in the false dichotomy mindset.
Yeah.
So like, why can't you do anything? You don't have to go to university, but you should still have the door open.
Right.
Instead of saying go between a CT pathway and a university prep pathway, why don't we just tear that apart in the same design that Booker T. Washington had in the mid 19th century? I mean, this isn't new thinking. This is 150-year-old thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes ideas have to be recycled and rejuvenated in order to make a comeback.
And here he is. He's doing it. He's recycling that.
But I mean, like showing people like that we quote unquote threw out an old idea that we shouldn't have is disruptive in education because a lot of people are just like, oh, well, we've already done that. So why would we do it again? Or like, it didn't work. So, but taking a new lens on a lot of, you're calling them old ideas, but you're putting a spin on it. I mean, like you were like, let's give them a 5-credit university financial literacy math class. Like that's I think thinking outside the box in a good way, because I had friends in high school. I was definitely in high school in like the peak time where it was like you're either tracked as like an honors university student or you're like going to automotive or culinary school, and you're like our worlds were completely separate. I was like I had friends that were quote unquote the bad kids. I mean, literally, like that's how they thought of themselves. And it was like they're like, oh well, I could never take the AP and IB classes that you're taking. And I'm just like, you absolutely could. I have no idea at what point you like got tracked or this mentality that you were less than almost. So I think like I know that was one of my missions when I was in the classroom full time, was to make chemistry in particular a vehicle for all students, and especially lean into the students that were like the automotive or the welding kids or whatever they were, they thought themselves like, oh, I have to take this chemistry class to graduate because I want to do XYZ, and I'm really nervous about it, because I'm this. Those are my favorite students because they actually like appreciated like someone taking their different way of thinking and applying it. And I just think there's a lot to be said about showing kids that what's possible and without dead ends. So we're covering like a whole lot
Yeah.
here.
Well, he is a superintendent, so he looks over a lot.
He does do a lot. Okay, so you are doing, I just want to kind of pivot because you're doing work now like around AI, competency frameworks, workforce alignment, and AI is kind of like, a hot button topic. So I am curious, like, how do you think AI changes the conversation around readiness and maybe like what schools should value?
You might cut all of this out of the podcast. I'm really gotten obsessed with agentic design. So everybody talks a lot about agent design, like an agent, like you give somebody a job and they do a job. Agentic is moving us into this world where you can actually take like 5 agents and everybody gets a job, and then you can build a chief of staff agent. And then the chief of staff can tell every agent what to do to kind of create a, structured output. And then what it really dawned on me is for students to understand agentic design and really the future of where AI is going, they really need to understand human interactions and team building. Because I coach rugby for fun. I've been doing it for 20 years. And you think like when I'm putting a rugby team on the field, I've got a prop, I've got a lock, I've got a center, I've got a fly half, I've got a scrum half, and everybody's got to do a job, and I have to kind of interconnect them. And that's and this new transition from prompting, an agent to now doing an agent to give them a job to do to now having a team of agents who do work really makes it so you have to kind of understand this teamwork structure and role identification and capacity building. So it's literally like that using AI to rebuild human interaction and executive functioning skills is so much more important because the ability to see how people function as a team and then understanding programming as team members is so I feel like if we're going to do AI instruction correctly, then old CTE is not really gone. Old CTE needs to become more important because it's really going to be dependent upon this ability to kind of build teamwork and networking and organizational charts where we have role definitions. So I think when we look at the new evolution of AI that's really come out in the last 9 months, should be really looking at how do we have teenagers working as teams and working with each other to understand how that can translate to new software and programming they're doing.
Does that mean in schools we should maybe measure less on individual performance versus teams? Or is there something that we're still measuring in schools as this comes around that maybe should matter a little less?
This is going to be a really long answer because I think the reality to say something matters less or more is a hard conversation. So I think the conversation of like executive functioning and durable skills has become a big topic. Like how do we teach like social interaction, team building? How do you teach? At the end of the day, if I'm coaching rugby, we still have a ball, you still have a job to do, you still have a skill. And there's kind of like an alignment when we have this work-based learning environment. Let's say we have a goal to build out a whole youth apprenticeship-based system. Well, there's 2 conversations to be had that come together in a very beautiful way. So let's just talk about this executive functioning team building skill. In the world of triage, you still have to teach hard skills. Like we can talk about the executive functioning, the team skills, all of this is so much more important. And I don't think that's an argument worth having. I think that's fair. They're super important. Kids need this. They're going to need it if they're going to be successful. But there's still a point, just for straight practical reasons. If we're going to do teamwork, focus, right? Seeing a skill to the end. Doing what?
Right.
Like if you're going to stay focused on a project, doing what? Like, what are you going to stay focused on? Like, if you're going to be working together as a team, doing what? And
Mhm.
that really stood out to me. It was really funny when we were touring the German system. They teach you these occupational competencies. The Swiss actually have what they call a Swiss Occupational Competency Index, where they literally have jobs and they define the role responsibilities. It's much like the ONET skills we have on ONET Online that define responsibilities, but just so much more robust. And it was interesting when we're doing this German tour, they teach you these occupational skills, but then they actually show that like then you do the job. So they actually had all of these job retraining. So everybody was always like, well, you can't like what happens if someone wants to change jobs? They're like, it's no problem. We can literally through night class teach you the hard skills because you've already shown that you know how to show up and you know how to work together as a team, you know how to socially interact. So their actual priority was those occupational, durable, executive functioning skills, whatever you want to call them. There was a Swiss study that showed 22 out of 24 of those durable skills are best learned on the job, not even best learned in skill. So those durable skills are actually best learned on the job. So we actually know we should be trying to get kids to an on-the-job experience. And if you have to get retrained, you can actually get retrained at night, or like you can learn those hard skills real fast. But there's still a point where we're not dismissing the hard skills. You have to learn the hard skills first because that's going to give you the thing to do when you're on the job building those durable skills. So there's always this kind of argument where it's like, well, the durable skills are more important. It doesn't really matter what thing you're doing. Let's teach the durable skills. Well, it does matter what thing you're doing because it brings me to point two, which is not at all what you asked, but it's how you bring employer partners to the table because we keep on ignoring the economies of partnership. So the big model right now is what the Swiss call a subsidy investment model. There's really three ways why you bring employers to the table. And this is actually now gets into my doctoral work because it was like we have this whole student learning problem.
Mhm.
But the student learning problem needs to be solved through an economic problem. And they actually come together in a very beautiful way. There's three ways you bring employers to partnership. Number one is philanthropy, right? They're going to take a hit. They're going to take a financial hit. They're going to donate their time. Somebody else is going to get the benefit from it, but they're going to do it for the good. And if they have economic hits, they're going to walk away from that philanthropic partnership. And generally, there's this study out of Switzerland they did in Nepal, and I thought it was funny that it was in Nepal and it was identical here in the United States. Normally, when the employers come to the table, it's because they have a relationship to somebody in the school. Like, this is my Uncle Joe. He has a textile company. We're going to do it. And I was like, oh, it's funny that this is what happens in Nepal because that's every CT advisory I've ever been to, ever.
Yep.
The second model that you're seeing as everybody's trying to build youth apprenticeship is what's called the subsidy model. Our government is going to give you $7,500 to bring on these student youth apprentices, and we'll give you a subsidy. But eventually, employers need that subsidy. They wrap it up in their business model and they grow to depend upon it. And when the government can no longer afford the subsidy model, they cancel all the youth apprenticeship systems all entirely. So the Swiss actually advocate, and this is how we've designed every youth apprenticeship I've ever been in. They call it the productivity investment model, which means you teach the student a hard skill. Well, that student is learning a skill, that employer is losing money. They're paying them a salary, but that student is not producing. So what you want to do through the productivity investment model, and this will come full circle to your question, they are learning a skill and the employer is losing money, but it's okay. And the second half of that on the job experience, that student now becomes productive. And just their own production pays for their time to be there, but you pay them a training salary that absorbs it. So, like when we're doing our youth apprenticeship system, under apprenticeship wages are 80% of the journey rate. We do a lot of occupational job skills before the student ever shows up. So then that way they have a short onboarding. So then that way their 80% wage makes up for the time the employer spent training them. And then they get a wage progression for every 500 hours until they reach that journey rate. So then they're able to produce for that employer. So the question is, well, then what are they learning? They're learning the durable skills. So the thing is, if the student was just learning hard skills the entire time they were on that apprenticeship, the employer's losing money and we failed on the economic return on investment on what's going to drive these work-based learning experiences. But we also took away the opportunity for the student to build those executive functioning skills, those durable skills. So realistically, we can actually solve both problems by looking at the economic return for our employers and those durable skills a student gets by being productive for the employer.
Thank you for taking us through that because that is economic development. We've got a few past guests that talk similar to this, right, Allie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a few. I mean, it's a hot topic, but it's like I like that you fleshed out the three common models, because I don't
Yes.
think for those that aren't immersed in the CTE world, they don't really understand like why a program would come and go, and how, and a lot of it is based on how it was built and structured. And you do talk a lot about that in how you, in what you write, about like you got to build it so that it's not a handshake agreement, or it's not like it's got to be built on like a firm foundation that can withstand the test of time, for sure.
And ROI. I mean, you need to show the actual functional return on investment, because if it's dependent upon, like I said, I use the example of Uncle Joe at the textile factory. But if like you're there because we have this interpersonal relationship because we were in the same Rotary or we're in the same, I mean, that's fine. You're probably going to get your employers through the door on philanthropy, but you need to eventually move from philanthropy to productivity investment to actually show this relationship and this partnership is going to create a return on investment just for the sake of the relationship.
Got it.
And it's measurable.
Right. And so one of the things, Chris, that a lot of people will talk about, we see it a lot in a lot of conferences and such, is yeah, what he's talking about is a wealthy district, right? So a lot of your work has actually happened in rural and kind of high poverty communities. So what have those experiences taught you about what students actually need from education? 'Cause, and you know, how is this possible?
Um, I mean, there's a lot of benefit. When I was in West Valley, Yakima, we were definitely, Yakima is not known for the most economically advantaged community, but our district was known as the more economically advantaged district within that community.
Mhm.
So, and there's a lot of benefit to being in, affluent communities. They're definitely more willing to take risks. They're more willing to like, let's go, there's this ego and swagger to say, well, we know we're the best, so we're going to go ahead and roll the dice and being the best.
Mhm.
And I think it was a great place to cut my teeth. But that was one of the arguments we kept on getting was like, well, of course, West Valley Yakima can build the apprenticeship. You guys do all kinds of crazy cool things. My best friend, Peter, runs the national AASA cohort for early learning, and the cool things he does in early learning, and it would blow your mind. So it was definitely a place to let me try to do these cool things. But that was kind of the point of taking the superintendency. I grew up in Grays Harbor County. We're definitely known as one of the more economically disadvantaged. We have the second lowest post-secondary going rate in the state for a county. And there was a lot of opportunity to do incredible work for kids. We're the home of WPPSS, WPPSS, which stands for the Washington Public Power Supply System. And it was the largest municipal bond failure in the entire history of the United States. Okay, I think about a $2.25 billion bond failure of a nuclear power plant that literally put half the town out of work. So very like 1980s movie. But a lot of community pride and a lot of community members that are willing to come up and help each other out, and a lot of community members willing to do great work. So like when it came time to onboard employer partners, and so the employers were willing to bring kids on board, but it was a totally different mindset. Like in West Valley, our parents were already committed that their kids were going to get a 4-year university degree. In Alma, our parents were really committed that our kids were going to go get jobs. Like my first year here, we had an 8% 8% 4-year university going rate, 14% post-secondary going rate, but a 97% grad rate. So our kids were graduating at really high rates, but really not going on anywhere to do anything. So we knew that the ability to build a work-based learning system wasn't going to be feared in Elma. What was going to be new was breaking apart the systemic barriers on pursuing a post-secondary education that our students wouldn't necessarily see. So by breaking apart those systems and our students started seeing they could go to university and then started getting accepted, Rosa. So in 3 years, we went from an 8% 4-year university going rate to a 24% 4-year university going rate. And that was in 2024. So our data only goes back to 2024 because it's through what's called the ERDC, Educational Research Data Center. So it's only updated to 24 right now because they also want to see retention rates, how long students hang out. But that was the highest in the history of the district since the data's been tracked since 2005. So we realized by just breaking apart those, we built our program kind of true to the expectations of our families, but then by tearing apart the systemic barriers, we had a skyrocket in our post-secondary going rate.
Mm.
So I feel like it worked the exact same as it worked when I was in West Valley Yakima, which was an affluent district, but the entry point was different. I mean, people were still entering this bifurcated system. West Valley was entering with the expectation of going to university. Elma was entering with the expectation of going to workforce. But then still by breaking apart those barriers, you started seeing very similar results.
That's cool that you got to have kind of like different experiences in your education journey that probably challenged you in completely different ways. But has built again, I'll go back to you have a lot to say, good things to say about education, and public figure you are because of it. So we as a superintendent, superintendents are busy people, so we have to be very mindful of our time. But I wanted to kind of round out our conversation with a more open-ended question of, you know, if we're really thinking about being bold in education, that's our word of the year, what does that look like in leadership? Since you are in leadership, we don't often get the chance to have a superintendent who can speak about leadership from that level. So what would you say bold leadership, disruptive leadership looks like in 2026 and beyond in education?
It actually saddens me to say, but I think we need to do what's right for kids, and that shouldn't be bold leadership. But it's interesting how many conversations of people talking about how education should look and how we make conscious decisions because we understand how much it's not going to be palatable. I mean, when you look at how many kids like get A's because they know how to play the game at school and they have affluent parents, but we don't want to move to a competency system that shows whether or not they can do math or whether or not they actually can read, because we know that those parents are going to be upset. I mean, it honestly, Washington State, we're not actually accountable to student achievement in our state. We're accountable to the perception of achievement. I mean, what really undoes you as a superintendent is we collect what are called levies. Levies aren't consistent across, but I mean, it's not uncommon that you're going to pass, other states have their own mechanism where voters go out, they vote, and you can run a 2 to 6 year levy. And that's where we're capturing about 20% of our funding. And if you fail your levies, then it becomes immediately apparent you're doing a bad job. Well, what passes levies is the perception of doing a good job. Now, you could be in a district that has like college educated parents, and the expectation of doing a good job and the perception of doing a good job is if you have a college educated student population. I mean, if you have college educated parents and kids aren't getting into college, you're probably not going to pass your levies. But the levy pass rate and your student achievement is really going to be looking a lot like what your students do. What your students do is going to look a lot like the general makeup of what your parents have achieved, because that's really what's setting the bar of their expectation. So to come in and tell your parents, we have a 97% grad rate and an 8% post-secondary going rate, and we're not really doing the job we told you we were doing for your kids, is really disruptive, because parents at that point, that's the educational makeup of our parents. So that's actually doing a great job. And to change that up means you're putting your levy at risk. So you're actually putting your entire job at risk. You're putting your sustainability at risk. I mean, there really is no functional benefit to do what's right by kids under a funding system where your success isn't really about being successful. Your success is around creating the optics of success.
Heard that before from a few people as well. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not hireable as a superintendent, to be clear.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was interviewing, boards are thinking real, clearly, should I hire this person who might put our levy at risk?
Mm-hmm.
Who might put our funding at risk? Should we hire somebody who, yeah, outcomes for kids are going to improve, better things for kids are going to improve, but if we fail our levy, it could result in actually worse things happening for kids, because now we don't have the ability to pay for these resources. Mm-hmm. So we have a whole funding source system that doesn't really benefit actually doing good things for kids. And you're seeing our community, you just got to turn it on. Community people are seeing it. They just can't put their finger on what the problem is. And they're not really realizing that it's so much of our success depends upon perception and not reality.
Whew, that's it. That's let's find. I always say follow the money, and then you'll get your answers. And I think you just made that crystal clear. And so who, if anybody out there is listening as part of a ginormous organization, which there are there, hey, you get what you pay for. So let's see what we're going to pay. So I think the question is like, what could happen if we finally built a system that has funding that actually treats every student's potential as expandable instead of fixed? That's a whole nother podcast. Chris, I know we are coming to the end of the time. How can people connect with you, find out more about you? Because this is the tip of the iceberg as we know you.
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, Christopher NeSmith. And then I'll be having should be having a book come out in December or January of next year on, honestly, foundations for building successful career pathways, and kind of like what it's looked like through both my experience, doctoral work, and kind of traveling abroad and seeing how the best systems in the world are making their systems work. So
I'm gonna guess you're good at German now, maybe a little bit
I
better.
lost out on that year of high school German for my apprenticeship or my internship, but definitely the time in German and Switzerland probably made up for that missing credit.
Very good. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time out. We know that your level of administrations and administrators as superintendents is very, very time consuming, especially this time of year. Thank you for hanging out with us on the Disrupt Education podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Peter and Allie.
And for Allie Dahl, I'm Peter Hostrasser. Hey, you like the shirts, you like the gear, disrupteducationpodcast.com. Check it out. We'll catch you next week. See you later. Thanks for tuning in to the Disrupt Education podcast. If this episode sparked an idea, challenged your thinking, or helped you see education differently, well, that's exactly why we're here. We're highlighting real stories and bold ideas shaping the future of learning. A quick thank you to our sponsor, UScience BrightPath, the next generation platform helping students make personalized decisions as they move from education to career. If you're serious about connecting students to real opportunity, head to uscience.com/disrupteducation-podcast. Request a demo and let them know you heard about UScience right here on the Disrupt Education podcast. For more episodes and clips and ways to connect, you can always visit disrupteducationpodcast.com. I'm Peter Hostrasser. Keep disrupting. We'll see you next time on the podcast.